Hello, I'm Dawn, and I am going to give a quick overview of watercolor painting. Full disclosure, I'm a bit of a beginner myself. I just started in May or June, so I've been painting less than a year. So this isn't going to be giving expert tips or anything. This is going to be giving tips that I wish I had when I was just starting out. You know, all this information, me trying to figure out, what kind of paper I need, what kind of brushes, what kind of paints, what are tubes, what are pan paints and that kind of thing. And so I'm just going to be quick. It's going to be minimal editing, so bear with me. So first we're going to talk about paper. There's all kinds of different paper. I started out on sketchbook paper, which is not watercolor paper, which I don't recommend. There is watercolor paper. 100% cotton is typically what everyone recommends. It is the best to use for watercolor. 140 pound. You can get on Amazon, Michaels, any art store. Arches is the best, one of the best. Like, there are other premium papers out there, but definitely one of the best. This is cold press, 140 pound. You'll see with cold press here. Actually, let me get my travel journal so you can see that better. I want to show you the texture. Cold press has a moderate amount of texture to it. I think you can see it right there. Hot press, and you see it says pink, different color, is smoother. So you can see really no texture. The water will tend to stay more on the surface. It's often used for like detail work. Cold press is the one I use the most. I think probably most people use cold press the most. And then there is rough. This is also a brand that people use quite a bit. Also 100% cotton. And this is the rough texture. You can see just more texture than the cold press. I'm trying to see if it comes up in the camera there. There you go. So there's different types of paper. Like this is a pad, right? So you can flip through it. You can cut or tear out pages. This is a block. So a block confuses a lot of beginners. It confused me. You'll get it. You'll see the edges are black. The paper is white. Well, actually, this paper is purple because I painted on it. But the paper is white, and you can lift this off by basically putting something underneath that little hole right there and just sliding it around. And when you slide it around, you'll see it's white paper underneath. The thing is you want to keep the paper on the block while you're painting. That's the purpose of a block. Don't take it off. This keeps your paper flat, keeps it from warping. If you're going to be using a lot of water, you paint on the block. It's similar to like stretching your paper or taping it down. And then when it's all dry and done, then you can take it off of the block. So that's a block. So when you're doing your paper, if you're going to be painting on something, this is my little scrap piece of paper. If you're going to be using a lot of water and you're not using a block, I'm using some tape here that's like all messed up. You're going to want to tape your paper down. And taping it is going to keep your paper from warping when you use a lot of water. You don't have to tape it down if you're not going to be using a lot of water. So if you're just doing something like this in your book, you don't have to tape it down. So tape your paper down on all sides. And we're using paper here. I'm reusing tape here. And if you're using new tape, you might want to de-tacky the tape on your clothing first. That'll make it so it doesn't stick too hard to your paper, because you don't want to risk tearing your paper when you pull it back up. And we'll talk about that. Press really, really firmly, especially where it's meeting the paper. And tape it on something you can lift and move around if you want to move the water around. A piece of cardboard's just fine. So that's that. How to take off your tape wait till your paper is dry. So don't try to take it off of wet paper. And then you can just pull it off. If you have high quality paper and you've detached it, it's not going to tear your paper. That being said, a lot of people use an air gun, mini hot air gun. This one's doesn't reach my plug where I am right now, so I'm not going to turn it on. But you would turn it on, it would blow out hot air. You put it over the tape, and as it's going, you put it over the tape and just pull the tape up. The hot air gun will release the adhesive, so it's not gonna tear your paper. The next thing I'm gonna get into, brushes, because that's a big question for newcomers, myself included. There are different kinds of brushes, but you definitely want to be having a watercolor brush. I mean, you can use like any paintbrush really, but watercolor brushes are obviously meant for watercolor. So there are different kinds. This is like one of the top kinds. You'll hear people say a Klinsky Sable. It is a natural hair brush. It'll hold a lot of water, and it'll soak up a lot of the paint in your palette. And my paint's pretty dilute right now. I'm gonna have to add some, but it holds a lot of water here. Let me move this down. You can kind of just see like how much water it's holding already. So, Klinsky Sable. Then you have what I started out with, these cheap Amazon Ortegria round brush. I got a set. It's synthetic, works just fine. Takes more of my dilute. It works great. I like these. I use them a lot. They're really cheap. Klinsky Sable is going to be expensive. You don't need to brush into your expensive brushes. You can use a cheap, brush off of Amazon. That's fine. Princeton is a brand that you'll hear a lot of. They have different series. This is a Neptune. This is a Heritage. And then they have the Aqua Elite. They just vary in like this one I think is supposed to mimic more Klinsky Sable. It's a bit softer. The Aqua Elite is actually pretty soft. That might be the one that mimics Klinsky Sable. I actually like I like this Neptune round brush. I like this cheap round brush. It just depends on what you want. This one is a little firmer, this Heritage. So it's got a little bit more spring to it. I just like D-shaped it. A little bit more spring to it, which is nice for certain things. So if you're going to get brushes, I just recommend, start with a cheap set on Amazon that says it's for watercolor and just get started with that. And then, buy, a couple of Princeton brushes, buy a Heritage, buy a Neptune, buy an Aqua Elite. See what you like. You're going to want them in your, collection eventually if you get into this more seriously. But you can start with cheap brushes. The paper matters more than the brushes. The paper, the 100% cotton, I do recommend that you just start with 100% cotton. A high quality paper like Arches. I know it's expensive. If you start with a big one like this, you can cut it. You have a paper cutter or scissors. You can cut it into smaller ones for practice. You don't have to practice on the big ones. But 100% cotton paper does take water and paint a lot differently. It doesn't mean you can't use the mixed media paper that says it's for watercolor but isn't 100% cotton. I started on Amazon Basics watercolor paper. It doesn't even tell you what the percentage is, so it's not 100% cotton. But I do notice how the water spreads. It spreads a lot differently on the 100% cotton high quality paper than it does on the cheaper paper. And it's just going to be more fun, and you're going to learn how the paper takes water. So if you're going to put some money into it, I'd put it on the paper. Again, you don't have to, but get watercolor paper at the very least. Okay, I'm looking at my notes here. So let's talk about paints now. I started, probably most people start with palettes. And this is my Paul Rubin well-used palette, as you can see. And when you're doing your palette, this is already damp, but it'd normally be dry. You're going to have to spritz it with water because it's watercolor. So you need water to activate the paints. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to really paint with them. And then you take, this is my Escoda Versatile brush. It's supposed to be a Kolinsky Sable dupe. A lot of artists do like this brand, and this works very well. You notice this one doesn't quite have the same kind of point, but it's a round brush. These were round brushes. Round brushes are probably going to be your go-to. I'll talk a little bit about some of the shapes of brushes too. But let's dive into the pan paints here. So you're going to usually dip my thing in water, swish it around a bit, just like get it all nice and soaked. And then you can just start putting that paint. My paper's already wet, so you see it's still wet, so you can see how that paint is spreading because the underlying paper is damp. So that's pan paints. You can take them straight from the pan, or if you wanted to mix two colors, obviously you can mix them on the palette. You can take two colors, a blue and I don't know, like a green here, and mix them, and then you'll have like a custom color here. So you can see custom color there. There are different types of palettes, by the way. Plastic, metal, ceramic. I'm going to get into that in 1 second. But first, I'm going to tell you about the other type of paints, tubes. And tube paints confused the heck out of me when I first started, so I'm just going to show you how to use them. They're pretty easy. The thing I like about tube paints is you don't have to worry about contaminating your colors. Like when you use a palette and you dip back and forth, you typically get some contamination. The other thing is it's easier to control the water to paint ratio. So if you want a really creamy mixture here, sometimes it can be a little difficult to get quite the texture and the consistency you want on a palette. Not too bad, but just a little bit more difficult. And especially because different palettes are going to pull the paint off of your brush a bit better than others. So with a tube paint, let's take my green here, which the cap is really tight. There we go. You're just going to squeeze it out into your palette. I already have a different color in there, but no big deal. And then you're going to promptly screw this cap back on so it doesn't dry out. You can use this straight from the tube without adding water to it because it's already kind of got water in it. Now, the thing with that is this is a very thick mixture. You're generally going to want to add some water to it. If you want thick, you can. But if you add water to it, you can do that with spritzing it. You can do that with just dipping your brush in water. And now you see I just dipped my brush in water and now got like a much more watery mixture. If I wanted that thicker, I'd have used a lot less water. I'd have, dipped my brush in and tapped my brush on a paper towel. So now you've got a lighter, more watery mixture. So you can control that ratio there on your palette with that. When you dip your brush in water, you can hear me doing that. It's going to be dripping. You generally do want to have like a paper towel or microfiber cloth, kind of tap it a bit, just to get some of that excess water out so it doesn't drip all over your paper. So we've talked about the paints. The other thing about paints is, this is Daniel Smith. They're considered one of the best quality paints. There are other good quality paints, Paul Rubens, Winsor Newton, professional series. There's generally like student or academy grade, and then there's professional grade. Professional grade are going to be more expensive. They're higher quality paints. They tend to be more light fast, meaning they'll stand up to UV, sunlight better, because watercolor is something that you do have to protect typically. If it's in direct sunlight, it's going to fade over time. The higher quality paints have light fast ratings on them. The different colors will have different ratings. So this Serpentine Genuine Green has a light fast rating of 4, which is pretty high. This brighter Quinacridone Lilac has a light fast rating of 2, which is a lower light fast rating. The brighter colors tend to be lower light fast. However, you can protect your watercolor paintings. That's why people frame them behind glass, preferably UV protecting glass, UV archival glass, and just keep them out of direct sunlight. Honestly, even if you didn't put them in a frame, which I don't do a lot of mine, I just have them pinned up. If they're not in direct sunlight, they're really not going to fade. It'll take a long time for them to actually fade. But they're not like acrylic or oils. It'll be like there for, 500 years unless you protect them. You can also, they do make UV sprays you can use to protect them too, but glass behind a UV glass is just fine and out of direct sunlight. So the other thing I want to talk about is water. So you can see I have 2 water bowls here. This one's dirty already because I've been playing around with it. This one is clean. You're going to want to have at least 2. They also make these things on Amazon that look like a water cooler. It's upside down, or like the way that the dog drinks out of it. Gravity well. So a bottle you screw in, and then you have a little button that'll drain it. And then you can just rinse your brush in that, hit the button, it drains the water, and more water comes from the container. I have one of those. It's great. Otherwise, just have 2 containers. This one's for dirty, so you clean your brush in the dirty one. And then before you, dip it into paint, you go into the clean one to get all of the stuff out. And then you want to usually dip it, tap it onto like a paper towel or something. So 2 water containers, that's probably the best thing you can do. And keep your paints nice and clean and your brushes nice and clean. And also, how do you clean your watercolor brush? You just swish it around in clean water. Tap it on like a paper towel. You see I'm kind of going with the brush like this. And I'm kind of shaping the brush, getting that water off. And then I'm going to look with my finger. Now I'm going to either lay this flat on the paper towel, the clean paper towel, or if you have something like this, you can hang it, with the brush facing downward, see, like that. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have them wet that way. Once they're dry, you can store them that way, but you don't want the water to go into this, I think that's called the ferrule thing here. There's glue here and stuff, and that can weaken it over time. So lay it flat on a paper towel or just hang it that way. When you hang it, be careful it doesn't slip. Be careful this tip isn't touching anything, because if it's bent like that and it dries that way, good luck trying to get it straightened out. You can try it with boiling water and stuff like that, but just don't let it get bent while it's drying, because I've had that problem. I made that mistake once. It was very hard. The brush is never the same. Okay, we're going to talk about a few other things like salt, alcohol, special effects, gouache, bleed proof, different types of paints. I'm going to tell you a little bit about like Kuretake paints, masking fluid, and stuff like that. I'm going to take a quick break. Okay, so I'm going to talk quickly about these tools like isopropyl alcohol, bleed proof, right, salt, masking fluid. Let's just quickly let's talk about salt and alcohol. So in order to do this, I am going to I'm going to wet this and color it, and I'm going to show you in a second. Okay, so you can see that I am throwing down some wet, thick paint here, okay? And I'm going to show you what happens when you take some salt here. I'm going to do it on one section up here, kind of thick. You're going to need it to dry. Then I'm going to take some isopropyl alcohol here, and to show you exactly, I should have worked faster than I am right now. So this is a drop. So I want you to see what it's doing. So you see the alcohol and is pushing the pigment in the water away. So you get these nifty little effects. You can use it as a spray bottle, or you can use it with a pipette and a dropper. And, you know, like some people do that for little dandelions and things like that. But those are some effects that you can use creatively, however you want. Now what the salt is going to do, and that I'll show you, I'm going to set this aside and let it dry, is it's also going to push the pigment and water away, kind of dissolve in it, and it's going to create some textured effects. So we'll set this aside, let that part dry, because this thing is wet. And now I'm going to go over masking fluid. So masking fluid is basically, it's like a latex or something, but you're going to put it on your paper, the white part of your paper. I'm just going to do a line here. And this one, you know, has a tip that it does not want to come out because it's got a thing on it. There we go. It's got some dried masking fluid on it. So, and I think this one might have dried. Might have dried. There we go. Nope. I'm going to have to beat it into submission. Okay, this one is dried in the tip. So rather than fiddle with it, let me go get another one for you. Okay, here's Daniel Smith's masking fluid. You can take the cap off, or you can use this fine tip here, upside down, and then squeeze the bottle. And when you squeeze the bottle, you're going to see, I don't know if you can see, but let me just put this on tightly and hold that up. I wanted the blue so you could see it, but you see that line? You're going to let that dry completely, 100% dry, like maybe an hour. And then you can paint over it. And when you paint over it, the color is not going to go where that masking fluid is. So it keeps the white of your paper. And then when it's completely dry, you can just take your finger and peel that gently off of your paper. And that'll leave your white space. So sometimes people use it to outline like flower petal that they want, like a white flower against a dark background. Some people use it for whiskers. You can also use things like white gouache or Martin's Bleed Proof White. Let's talk about this one. Martin's Bleed Proof White is essentially an ink. Now I wouldn't use like your good watercolor brushes with this, but this one you can paint over the watercolor, because watercolor is a transparent medium. So if you were to take white watercolor, it's not going to cover it as well. It'll be more like a glaze. A glaze is when you have a dry color of watercolor, you take a different color watercolor, and then you throw it over that color. So here you can see the Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White covers that watercolor. So a lot of watercolor artists use this for things like snow, stars, whiskers. If you have a little mess up in the corner, a little paint came under your tape, you can dab some of this on and cover it up. So this is something you don't have to have, but it's a good thing to have in your arsenal. Okay, the other thing I want to talk about is gouache, because this is a thing that confused a lot of people, me too, like maybe starting out. Gouache is like, it's basically opaque watercolor. It is a paint that is activated by water. You can use it straight out of the tube, or you can throw water in it. White gouache is similar. People use it similar to Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof for stars or snow effects, that kind of thing, because it will cover your paint. This is a green gouache. So probably white gouache is the one people use a lot. So we're going to just have a dab here on my palette. And I'm going to, I think that's probably still a little damp, but we're going to use it anyway. I also want to make sure I got all that white off of my cheap brush. So let's take the cheap brush, and I'm going to dab it straight into the gouache. Notice I didn't even put any water in the gouache, just the water from my brush. This is a dark blue. And you see I'm going right over that dark blue with the gouache. If you were to try this with white watercolor, you, let me go show you actually. Okay, I got my Daniel Smith titanium white, which is somewhat opaque, so it actually does do some decent coverage, but you're gonna see, and I'm gonna use it straight out of the tube. It's actually thicker than the gouache. This titanium white is it's pretty thick stuff from Daniel Smith. Let me dip a little bit of my water out. Okay, so there. So now I'm gonna put this on. There we go. Now the real test is gonna come when they dry. So you can already see just from being wet that the bottom one is the white watercolor and the top one is the gouache. When this dries completely, that bottom white watercolor is going to be even more transparent. So you're not going to quite see the coverage, but you can still see the blue through it. But with the white gouache, you can't see the blue through it. So gouache is very similar to, you use it in a similar way that you do watercolor, but it's opaque. So it covers. The other type of paints that are watercolor are kuretake. They're from Japan. And they are also considered to be more opaque, creamier. They are not, however, I wouldn't call them opaque, like actually 100, like opaque, not quite like gouache, but they are fairly opaque. So I'm just gonna put that in my, let me take the white one from here, which these are dry, so I'm just using my wet brush. Normally I'd spritz these, let it sit, but I'm just getting a tip here. So this is the kuretake white. And you can see I need it to be a little bit more wet in there because I didn't pull up quite enough paint. There we go. Let me do another line of that. There we go. So these two here, these two bottom ones, those are kuretake. That was slightly drier and that's wetter. So you can already see it's a little bit more opaque. When it dries, it is going to dry a little lighter, but the kuretake paints are very, very creamy, buttery, a little thicker, a little bit more opaque. You can see, whoops, I already put it in the wrong color. You can already see how that, where did I do it? Right there. How that kind of covers it. I got the sun moving in the wrong way there. So, let me put it on a green so you can see it better. So, see that green there? Now, in comparison to, breaking my rule about, let me use a thicker one here. It's hard to tell. I don't know if you can tell from the camera. They're both darker. They both cover pretty good, but in here I can see like when that fuchsia one dries, it's going to be a little lighter. When the pink kuretake dries, it's going to be a little bit more opaque. Not quite as opaque as gouache, but just thicker and creamier. And now I got to clean my my paint here because I accidentally put it on the wrong one. You can clean your paint if you mess up. You just dab it and, you know, with a wet brush and sop it up. And that is your whirlwind half an hour overview, introduction to watercolor. If you have any specific questions about anything, leave me a comment and I'll try to answer them as time allows. And I'll be doing more in-depth videos in the future. So thank you very much, and bye for now.